December 26th, 2004. What on the surface appeared to be a fairly nothing matchup between the NFL's worst team and a decent Buffalo Bills side, albeit one that didn't make the playoffs, ended up having historic implications. What those of us in attendance on this day got to see was the fall of professional football's Roman Empire. I am Cheyenne Hollis, this is the Touchback, and today we are talking about the day the San Francisco 49ers Dynasty died, and I just happened to have, well, I had a 6th row seat for the proceedings. The 2004 season was all kinds of miserable for the San Francisco 49ers. I actually was fortunate enough to attend 2 different 49ers contests in this season. The first being the historic shutout at Seattle in Seahawks Stadium, the first time the Niners had failed to score a point in a game in 420 attempts. The second game I went to that season, well, it just happened to be this Boxing Day clash between the Bills and San Francisco. That loss in Seattle to the Seahawks, it was embarrassing, it was humiliating, and it was all types of terrible. It's a story eventually I will get to on this channel. What it wasn't, though, was a death blow for the 49ers dynasty. To put everything in the context, though, we need to start at the beginning, which is the sort of decline of the 49ers between 1999 and 2004. It was rough sledding for the San Francisco 49ers in 1999, make no mistake about that. Steve Young suffered a concussion in week 3 and wouldn't actually play another NFL game. Jeff Garcia came in as the backup. He would be benched in favor of Steve Stenstrom. Stenstrom was an absolute disaster. They turned back to Garcia. The offense was just very discombobulated without Young in the lineup. However, the real problem with the team in 99 was the defense. They couldn't stop the run. They couldn't stop the pass. It was a disaster. Disaster that was not that surprising considering they were still playing R.W. McQuarters at cornerback. With uncertainty surrounding the quarterback position, the Niners went out and drafted a pair of passers in 2000. Of course, neither of those being Tom Brady. What ended up happening was Jeff Garcia went into 2000, won the starting job, and continued to lead the team. He was pretty good, all things considered, although he did amass quite a bit of garbage time stats, what made his overall line that year look better than it happened to be. On the other hand, the defense was still absolutely terrible. In 2000, there was also some petty drama between Jerry Rice and Terrell Owens, and in particular Jerry Rice's last game, where he felt like he got upstaged by Terrell Owens for catching 20 passes, but I mean, come on. I mean, Rice was notorious for not wanting to give up his spot. The team's fortunes reversed in 2001 and 2002, with the team once again finishing seasons with a winning record and making the postseason on both occasions. You would think with the ship having seemingly reversed course, there wouldn't be a desire by the front office to shake things up. Turns out that everyone was wrong, though. For reasons, former UCLA head coach Terry Donahue was somehow the 49ers general manager. No one really understood the logic behind him becoming an NFL general manager. He did not have the experience in the professional game. He didn't have the knowledge of the professional game. And quite frankly, he was just unsuited for this role. There were plenty head-scratching decisions made under Donahue's time in charge, but perhaps the most head-scratching, at least when it comes to the non-player personnel decisions, is firing Steve Mariucci after that playoff loss in 2002. Despite having led San Francisco through a transitional period as the side sort of bridged the gap from Young to the next wave of the 49ers dynasty, Donahue decided that he wanted to go in a different direction. That direction was replacing Mooch with Dennis Erickson, a decision that was sheer lunacy then, looks even worse now. I mean, what was he thinking? This is why you don't let college head coaches become NFL general managers. San Francisco 49ers fans hated, they absolutely hated, loathed, despised the hiring of Dennis Erickson, who they felt were beneath him. Whether that was true or not is something I'm not really interested in getting into right now. Their logic, though, is this. Dennis Erickson, in his last NFL stint, coached the Seattle Seahawks for 4 years in what was a very Jeff Fisher-esque just string of mediocrity, going 7-9 or 8-8 in all 4 years. He was then let go, went to Oregon State, had a few good years for the Beaver, but up until this point, the only success Erickson had was in the college game. On the field, the first season under Erickson for the 49ers was just a chaotic mess. They went 7-9, but you never knew what team was showing up from week to week. And considering the side had gone 10-6 in the previous campaign under Mariucci, this was seen as a very noticeable step back. Most of the blame from fans was placed squarely at ownership and the front office, who were seemingly hell-bent on running the franchise into the ground. The starting quarterback of that team was still Jeff Garcia, but he was released after the 2003 season due to what the team classified as salary cap restraints. That was true to a certain extent, but there was also more to this decision than actually meets the eye. Tim Rattay had started 3 games for the Niners in 2003 and went 2-1 in those starts. His stats were not particularly good, but the team's thinking or their logic was something along these lines. Tom Brady was a 7th round pick in the 2000 NFL draft. He didn't post big numbers in his first few starts and eventually went on to become a Super Bowl quarterback. Tim Rattay, he was a 7th round pick in the 2000 NFL draft. He won his first few starts, although not posting great numbers, so the only logical next step is for him to win a Super Bowl. The problem Rattay had, though, when compared to Brady, apart from a noticeable talent deficiency, was the fact he could never stay healthy. So with Rattay hurt at various points of the 2004 season, the 49ers would then turn to another 7th round pick, this one being Ken Dorsey. The Miami passer and now former Buffalo Bills offensive coordinator was brutal. He really had no business starting as many games as he did for an NFL team. The blame here, though, doesn't go on Dorsey. It's not his fault. He was thrust into a position that was never going to work out for him. The problem here lies in the fact the 49ers thought they could go into the 2004 season with Tim Rattay and Ken Dorsey and Cody Pickett as their quarterback room. This seemed flawed to anyone who followed football. Unsurprisingly, the entire 2004 season was an unmitigated disaster for San Francisco, but there is something interesting to note. The team never managed to get blown out at home. They weren't particularly good and they lost a lot of games, but there was never just a game where they were boat raced out of what was then 3Com Stadium. Don't get me wrong, fans were extremely unhappy with the product on the field and there were boos in Candlestick from time to time, yet you still had a lot of the classic San Francisco 49ers fan base optimism. A lot of them believed they were just a couple of players away from turning it around, some player development away from turning it around. They still thought that the dynasty was there, that they were still living in this dynasty era, and it was just a matter of moments before the team would turn it all around and they would just move forward into the future. That is, of course, what winning for 20 plus straight years does to a fan base. All of that brings us back to this post-Christmas Week 16 showdown by the Bay. The Byzantines had siphoned off half of the empire. The Vandals were at the gate. The San Francisco 49ers empire was about to meet its untimely end, even if none of us in the stands knew it just yet. Let me preface my game experience with that. I don't actually have any photos from my time here. You see, it's 2004 and I was rocking a Motorola V300. Taking photos, keeping photos wasn't necessarily a goal at this time of my life, and whatever pictures I did have long since been gone through all of my various phone trade-ups through the years. On this December 26th, I remember leaving my house in Sacramento early with a few friends, and we just wanted to get to Candlestick early to be in the parking lot to toss the football around. That's just kind of what we always wanted to do before NFL games at this point in our lives. The weather on this day was classic Candlestick. Very windy, cloudy, there were some bits of sun here and there. It was cold. I mean, it's exactly the kind of weather you would expect at Candlestick Park on any given December Sunday. If I'm being honest, it wasn't really that bad given the time of the year. Hanging out in the parking lot, the atmosphere was more a sense of relief than anything else from the 49ers fans. They just seemed to be happy that the season was almost over, and hopefully with that there would just be a huge house cleaning when it came to the general manager, the coaching staff. They just wanted to see all of those who were responsible for this terrible season let go. After throwing the Nerf football around for about a half an hour or so, it was time to go inside the stadium and take our seats. I had actually scored seats that were 6 rows behind one of the end zones. I was so stoked when I bought these tickets because I was going to be so close to the field. I was also stoked that they were so cheap. The joke though was on me because the 49ers were terrible and I was paying probably more money than I needed to pay for a game that wasn't going to be very good. Speaking of the game, the first quarter was pretty uneventful. Neither team scored. The Niners actually had the ball most of the first quarter, although they didn't do anything with it. They did somehow manage to stop the only Bills drive in that quarter as well. Niners fans were pretty happy by this development, all things considered. There were no 3-and-outs by the team. They didn't get gashed for huge gains. It was pretty much a net positive as we made our way to the second quarter. That is where things started to go downhill. The Bills had the ball at the start of the second quarter, and they just carved up the San Francisco defense on their way to scoring a touchdown. I mean, Drew Bledsoe had so many open wide receivers, and the drive would eventually end with Willis McGahee scoring a short TD. That was followed by a blink and you miss it 3-and-out by the Niners, who punted the ball back to Buffalo. The Bills then proceeded to just march right on down the field, this drive though ending in a field goal. A Ken Dorsey strip sack would end the next 49ers possession. Drew Bledsoe then got the ball and did what he had been doing pretty much the entire second quarter, just lobbing the ball to open receivers as the Bills made their way down the field. On this drive, he would find Lee Evans for a touchdown pass, and there was about 30 seconds remaining in the first half. What did San Francisco do with the ball and little to no time left in the second quarter? They ran a meaningless play, got like 5 yards, called a timeout, ran a second meaningless play, and went to halftime. This showing infuriated home fans. Those in attendance were pissed off. I mean, it was a confluence of everything. It wasn't just what they had did with those 2 plays, but those 2 plays ignited a powder keg of anger, and the fans booed the team mercilessly off the field. It was a wild sort of, I would say maybe like a minute 30 of real time. It didn't make sense. I don't understand what Erickson was doing at this point in the game. If you're not going to do anything, just take a knee or let the clock run out after the first play. But to take a timeout and then to run the ball, not even take a knee, but to just run the ball, it was almost like he was taunting the intelligence of home fans and what they would sort of tolerate. After the booing though, after the team had left the field, a different sort of reality set in. Most of the crowd during halftime, they just sort of sat there simmering in this silence, understanding that this team was not a quick fix away from being a contender. Like, it wasn't going to turn around with 1 or 2 players. The second half started with San Francisco barfing up a long kick return, and it was just more of the same from there. On San Francisco's first possession of the second half, Ken Dorsey threw a brutal interception that would eventually get him benched. Now, there's a caveat here because the team said Dorsey had a bruised finger. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not true, but I mean, it was pretty evident that that interception led to them making the change. This saw Cody Pickett take the field on the 49ers' next possession. His appearance drew what was perhaps the largest cheer of 49er fans on the day, at least up until this point in time. That hope died down quickly when the Niners promptly went 3 and out and more boos were heard. Things at this point just sort of descended into a farce. Both sides were making sloppy turnovers, neither side seemed particularly interested in playing out this game. Buffalo put backup quarterback Shane Matthews into the game with the score 27-0. He came in, I think, with about 2 plays or so remaining in the third quarter and played the entire fourth quarter. That move was really an indictment on the game as a whole. Buffalo never felt even remotely threatened by San Francisco's offense, which could only muster 6 first downs in 3 quarters of play. As the fourth quarter started to progress, there was really a sense of urgency by, I think, 49ers players, by the 49ers coaching staff, and really, especially from fans, to not get shut out at home. The goal here was clear, that the team needed to score. Buffalo had its backups in the game. They just had to find a way to break up the shutout. That led to San Francisco putting together a long clock-killing, a clock-draining drive, which would eventually see Kevin Barlow punch the ball into the end zone for a touchdown, breaking the shutout with roughly a little more than 6 minutes left on the clock. Fans were thrilled the team's home non-shutout streak was still alive. They still had that, even if they didn't have the overall shutout streak. They still had the fact that they hadn't been shut out in home forever and a day. As for the drive itself, well, it probably would have been more impressive had the 49ers not been playing against backups and trailing 41-0 at this point. You want to get a sense of just how ready everyone in the stadium on the field was just ready to go. The Bills got the ball back with, again, like a little over 6 minutes remaining. They ran it 10 straight times, and that was it. Game over. It just flew by. It was almost like watching like a Navy or an Air Force game, just in terms of sheer efficiency and the sheer desire to just drain the clock. Heading out of the stadium was almost like leaving a funeral. I mean, a lot of people had taken off well before the game ended, but I stayed until that final play because I paid for a ticket, right? Might as well get my money's worth. But the atmosphere, the ambiance, it was just really sad. There was some chatter from a few fans about how they were happy, hey, at least we didn't get shut out. But by and large, I think there was a realization of what actually just happened, what we had actually just witnessed play out in front of our eyes. The reality was clear. The San Francisco 49ers, most fans knew, were dead and buried. The bridge between the team on this day and Joe Montana, Steve Young, Roger Craig, Jerry Rice, Ronnie Lott, Ken Norton Jr., Dana Stubblefield, Merton Hanks, so on and so forth, all the way down the line to Dwight Clark's catch in 1981 was gone. The dynasty, the links to the dynasty no longer existed. The bridge had been burned. Even going into that game against the Bills, 49ers fans always had some hope, as I mentioned earlier. They always felt like they were able to turn it around because they had done so in the past. I mean, there had been a few down years between 1981 and then, and the team had always managed to reload and come back to be a playoff contender. And as bad as the Niners were in 2004, they had never been beaten comprehensively at home. They were always a score or two away from being in a game or winning a game. Most fans never really understood just how terrible and how awful and how far away from the Niners dynasty they were in reality. The aftermath of this, of course, is that the 49ers probably hit rock bottom on this day. It was really the final links to the past had been destroyed. Unfortunately for those in San Francisco, the team would not get its act together for a few years. While that game against the Bills, again, was probably rock bottom, they did not really do much positive until, really 2011. Drafting Alex Smith in 2005 with the number 1 pick they earned for their futility was not the franchise changer they had hoped. A lack of leadership from top to bottom really hamstrung any efforts of the 49ers to get their team rebuilding. It was a lot more of the same. This would also serve as a reality check for a lot of 49ers fans who had either forgotten or weren't alive for the team's terrible days back in the 70s and 60s and 50s and what have you. I mean, there were a lot of people who never knew about Steve DeBerg playing quarterback for the franchise before Bill Walsh took over. So yeah, it was really just an interesting time in the Bay Area as it relates to the 49ers. There are some sporting events you attend that sort of fade away from memory over the years, but I still vividly remember this December 26th showdown almost 20 years ago between the Niners and Bills for both what turned out to be historic implications and just the fact, I guess, growing up in Northern California and seeing the San Francisco 49ers being so good for so long, it was really weird to see this wounded, lame duck, pathetic 49ers team playing games at Candlestick again after all of their dominance. It was a very odd sort of thing to see. Although, if I'm being honest, yeah, I think I enjoyed it. And I think a lot of us in Northern California who were a little annoyed by San Francisco 49ers fans and their constant gloating and their constant bragging and their constant just being a nuisance about that success. It was a refreshing thing to see for some of us. To learn more about some of the bad draft picks the 49ers made during this time, you can check out the video in the right hand of your screen, or you can just see more about various stadium experiences I've had over the years. Thank you for watching. I am Cheyenne Hollis. This is the Touchback, and as always, hashtag take it out to the 25.